You have worked extensively in Assam and managed two of the state's most important wildlife landscapes, Manas and Kaziranga. How do you think Assam has fared over the years in terms of conservation of wildlife? Moreover, since you have seen many other landscapes and interacted with their managers over the years, are there some conservation challenges that you feel are particular or peculiar to Assam? And how have they been tackled or can they be tackled?
Yeah, I mean, I tell this to everybody, that Assam is very fascinating. This is, what I say, wildlife in my backyard. So it's one of those very, very unique states, I would say, where you do get, you ask any person in a rural landscape or in an urban landscape, oh yeah, we know the elephants come and they come and cross over, behind my house. So it is still in the 22nd century we are, and it is basically sort of still there. People are aware of the animals and the wildlife which is around them. So that is the beauty of Assam compared to, I would say, the Northeast. We do know, we are aware that Northeast is very unique. It has a very rich biodiversity, but it also has these peculiar challenges of what we call as anti-forest syndrome. So if it is whether you call it hunting or you call it any other, there are issues, and we do see that in many of the areas, which I think is a big, big challenge in Northeast, in Assam, in some of the hill districts. But overall, I think Assam fared better because of a general population which sort of, has been coexistent with wild animals around them. So that way, I would say that Assam comes on top, because when you talk about coexistence, when you talk about tradition, in terms of living with wildlife or with animals, then I think it is still very much available, and probably because 70 to 80% of Assam is still rural. Very few cities and all that. So I guess that's an advantage which has helped Assam. When we look at Manas and Kaziranga, they are very, very different in terms of their, case studies. Kaziranga is the pride of Assam. So, despite the upheavals, despite the, let's say the social unrest and everything else, Kaziranga has been able to sort of withstand it, sort of, take in, cushion in the disturbances, and it has now emerged as a benchmark for good conservation or a great conservation in that. Manas had a lot many, I would say, ups and downs. And it is still sort of, coming out of a very, very sort of, traumatic time. But again, yet again, these landscapes, especially in Assam, they are sort of examples, or they are sort of, giving us the evidence that why we need large areas, why we need inviolate areas, because they are able to take up, they are much more resilient, and they are able to, withstand any sort of anthropogenic pressures or disturbances that we may have in the long run. And that's why I would say that we are very fortunate that Assam still has such landscapes, such large inviolate areas which can be protected, because of which the wildlife can come back and be part of the ecosystem.
And then would you put in some problems that are especially challenging in Assam compared to other states when it comes to conservation?
Yes, I mean, having said that, Assam is having a lot of wildlife in its backyard, but at the same time, the infrastructure, so the linear infrastructure, especially, it has seen manifold expansion, and very rightly so. Earlier it was considered remote, It was something where you wouldn't, have the train access or the plane access or the road access, but now you do. So perhaps visually, we are able to perceive that yes, there are challenges for wildlife which was existing, but now they are troubled because of the rapid expansion of the development, and we can see it, we can perceive it. But having said that, since our science, our conservation science, and let's say the mitigation measures are already well established, or for that matter, well researched, I think it's important to implement them. So for example, let's say uh, the Kaziranga Karbi Anglong landscape. Now, there is a 38-kilometer highway, the national highway, which connects Upper Assam to lower, to the rest of the country through that highway. And this aspect of whether this highway can be bypassed and other alternative routes has been thought of for very long. It's actually, I remember when I joined the service in 2003, that itself, that's the time when WI was researching about it, that should we just close the highway and have it anywhere else? And I think a lot of research and work went into it, and somehow it wasn't working out. There wasn't any other route. On the north, you have the Brahmaputra. On the south, you have the Karbi Anglong Hills. And this highway, which is a sort of a lifeline, on an average, we have 5 to 7,000 vehicles flying a day. Now, over the years, we know that these vehicles, the number of vehicles flying on the road, will also increase manifold. So this is an immediate challenge which Assam, or for that matter, the Forest Department, is facing. And I guess that's the reason why this whole aspect of flyovers, because now I think we have the technology, we have the funds, we have the will, to come up with a flyover, so that at the end of the day, it's a solution which is probably a win-win for the wildlife and the humans. So that is something which has been brought about. Similarly, for other places in Assam, the elephants are the ones which are long ranging. They have been historically or traditionally, they move from one landscape to another. And with the new infrastructure and roads and railways and so on, there is likely to be disruption. There is disruption, which has sort of, given rise to conflict. So this is again a main challenge for Assam, I would say, which would need to be looked at, and we need to have some sort of, very active management. The third, I would say, again, giving the Kaziranga example. Now, Kaziranga, we have 3,000 odd rhinos. We have 1,200 plus elephants. We have, 3,000 odd buffaloes, wild buffaloes, and so on. So these animals, these mega herbivores or mega animals, and of course, we have the third largest density of tigers now in the world, is the result of good conservation, which is like 120 years of conservation of keeping areas inviolate, and the populations have increased and expanded. Areas have also been added to Kaziranga. So from 490 square kilometers to now it is 1,300 square kilometers. But what has happened is that these animals, and especially the ones which are long ranging, they are moving, they are dispersing. So from Kaziranga, we know that the rhinos have moved up to Lakhimpur, even up to Dibru-Saikhowa, they might even reach, because that's where the Tarai belt is, and that's where they were naturally there. So for me, I think that's a challenge as a forest officer. How do I keep my animals retained inside my protected area boundaries for a longer duration, be it the food requirement, the water requirement, or so on, so that we are able to minimize the conflict, is something which is a new challenge, because we were taught that, let's let nature take its own course, let protected areas, strict nature reserves is something where, you get the nature to take course. But for places like Kaziranga, where we have a very unusually high wildlife population now, I think we would need to have some sort of measures, which is to keep my habitat more productive so that we can support more animals in the landscape. Yes.
That is quite poignant. In fact, I'm here in Kanha, and here they are facing the same problem, at least Madhya Pradesh, of elephants moving in back into the landscape. As you said, rhinos going up to Tibru Saikho, where they were found back in the day, and elephants coming back to central India, where they were wiped off maybe 200 years ago. So I think all the points are very pertinent. And because you mentioned Manas as well, so maybe I'll take this opportunity to talk about a bit about Manas, and especially the peculiar problem that Manas had. So Manas is, at least for now, a rare example of a tiger reserve that has seemingly made a comeback after being almost written off due to the long violent insurgency that lasted decades. Um, we know wildlife suffered terribly, and the forest department had functionally little to no control over most of Manas during those years of insurgency. But today, it is also now one of those rare examples, perhaps the only one of its kind, where the local tribal community, that is the Bodos, have an important, officially designated role in managing Manas through the Bodoland Territorial, BTC Bodoland Territorial Council. Moreover, many former insurgents, as well as ex-poachers who may or may not have been part of the insurgency, they've all now become protectors. I've read about that the community also runs the Manas Mauzi Gendri, I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation, Ecotourism Society. Could you explain to us this Manas model? What role does BTC play in the management of Manas? And how different is the way the Manas Tiger Reserve administration functions compared to other tiger reserves? Also, do you think the Manas model can be replicated in other large mammalian conservation landscapes in India? It's a long question, but I thought it would be an interesting question.
Yeah, no, thanks, Raza, for asking this, because, uh, I've lived and worked in Kaziranga and Manas, but for me, I think a bigger impact has been Manas because it gave so much of variation in terms of the governance. I was, posted in the buffer region of Manas in Kokrajhar, so I've seen it from that point of view. Then I was there inside the national park. I think again, I would like to go back to the classic. There is this IUCN classic document, which is the protected area governance systems, it's Dudley et al. And it kind of opened my eyes when I read it because, we, especially in the forest department in India, we know only one type of governance, which is governance by the government. But if you see globally, there are multiple forms of governance. You could have governance by local communities. You could have governance by private people. You could have governance by, civil society organizations, and of course, the governance by government. So, and the shared governance models. So, world over, especially many countries which have not had a colonial history, do not follow the sort of models that we have grown up with, right? That, okay, this is a national park, this needs to be managed as a tiger reserve, and so on. So that number one. And that's why the Manas model is a classic and a great example of how one should do governance in areas of armed conflict, Now, Manas has a very, very interesting history, which you of course, it, is that in 1985, it was one of the first tiger reserves in the Project Tiger, 1973. 1985, it was a World Heritage Site, listed as a World Heritage, both Manas and Kaziranga. Interestingly, Manas got 3 criteria out of the 4, and Kaziranga got 2 out of the 4. So it certainly has higher biodiversity values. And by 1993, it was a World Heritage Site in danger. So one can imagine that, at one point of time, it was being given all these accolades, international, global accolades, Elephant Reserve, Biosphere Reserve, 1985. And within less than 10 years, it completely, got hit rock bottom. And by 1993, it was a World Heritage Site in danger. And the reason is, of course, because all its forest camps were plundered. All the rhinos, around 70 to 80 odd rhinos, were poached out. So the complete infrastructure of the national park was completely devastated. And it is not just because of it's only the national park. I'm also assuming it went across, let's say the other district administration or others, because it was a civil unrest. Then I think also the fact that, and one must not forget that Manas and Laukwa, Laukwa also had the same fate. Laukwa also had around 40 to 50 odd rhinos, and they were also poached out during that time. But Manas got the attention. And I think probably because it was a World Heritage tag, that, the global attention, the Indian government's attention was given to it. There were letters every year that, please do something, otherwise we're going to remove it from the World Heritage Site list. It was also the time when emergency assistance came in for the park. Because compared to, imagine a place where the district authorities are struggling to keep their people, safe. So there is very little, attention given to wildlife or for that matter, park. And that's where the UNESCO World Heritage came in, stepped in and supported the emergency assistance and so on. So that kept happening. And then in 2005, when the sixth schedule happened and the elections happened and the first local Bodo government came into force, they were the ones who said, okay, we are getting these letters, we are getting that we have to do something for Manas. And so they said, okay, then now what do we do? Because there is nobody willing to work there. Where do you get the trained forest person to go into your park? Because there is no infrastructure, there are no roads, there are no vehicles, and on top of it, there is this fear psychosis. And all the people who would know the park or to manage the park weren't there. And that's where this brilliant idea of taking the communities and taking their help. So erstwhile poachers who know the jungle like the back of their hand, if they were brought into the management of protection of the forest, it would work because, they would know the place. They would know that, okay, what we have to do. And that is exactly what happened. Manas Mauze Gendri Society, like you said, in the eastern part of Manas, was one of these organizations where, former poachers or former hunters of the local communities, they were taken, roped in. They were convinced that, okay, join us as part of the, forest and help us co-manage and co-govern. And that is where the turning point was. And it helped, because by the time it took the park infrastructure to come back, meanwhile, also, they decided, okay, let's bring in science. So adult rhinos were moved in from Pobitora and Kaziranga back into Manas. NGOs, the bigger NGOs were brought in that, okay, why don't you do the camera trap exercise, find out how many tigers are there. So it all worked. And in 2011, finally, with everybody's support, Manas was removed from the red list, and it was reinstated as a World Heritage. So this is a very classic and a very good, sort of an example of why governance cannot be straitjacketed, and it should evolve with time. It should evolve with the location, with the situation. and it should do that. If today somebody tells me that, would you, now that Manas is back on its feet, would you like to do that? Well, maybe I would not do the same model, because, we have our own strength. The forest department has its own strength. And also we don't want that, okay, there should be prevalence of arms or, country guns in the vicinity of the area. If there are young people who are the local community people who are interested to help out, then they should very well go through the recruitment process, join in a formal manner, trained in a formal manner, and support the park. But that time when Manas did not have anything, these are the people who supported it and, helped it come out of its situation. And that's why these are classic models which can be replicated, classic models to be replicated across areas where there may be issues of civil unrest and insurgency. We also know that areas where we have insurgency, if at all we have, are also high biodiversity areas. It goes hand in hand. So, how do you govern these areas? I think Manas can be a great example for that. Yes.
That is, there are so many questions that I have in mind, and so many things that I would like to pick your brains on someday. But for now, I think I was just always curious about one, question. Ever since I was a child, and I used to read about Manas, is that when the reintroduction of rhinos and I think swan deers as well was done. Uh, I used to hear from some people saying that there were 3 or 4, 5 rhinos and maybe a herd or 2 of deer that were alive in Manas from the original population. And then they were, but of course, reintroduced rhinos and swan deer then proliferated and they stabilized the population. Is it actually true? Were there a few rhinos left and a few swan deer left?
Well, see, I mean, it could be true, because people do say that, yes, there were animals, available. Clearly, swan deer was there. It had survived. Rhino is a fairly big animal, so if it would have been there, and there should have been some signs, but the fact is that the reintroductions were done because even if these animals were there, they were not a viable population. They had to be supplemented with additional population as a founder population. So, that is, if we take that premise, then I think the reintroduction of rhinos, or let's say the conservation translocation, as we call it now, of the rhinos was valid. The swan deer, I think, sends out of its genetic, base, in terms of, whether the animals which were left behind, were they inbreeding and so on. And that's why the swan deer translocation also happened. But, even then, these reintroductions that happened weren't fraught with challenges, I remember that when the first few rhinos came in, they were poached. They were poached. The adult first 2 or 3 rhinos did get poached out. And some of them started homing in. So they started walking back to Kaziranga and Pobitora, So, but that should not be a deterrent. What I feel is that we have now great science. We had great technology in our country to try out experiments. And that goes out not just for rhinos and swan deer, but also for elephants. Elephants, like now in our rescue center in Kaziranga, we have around 11 to 12, young calves. And we would want them to be, roam around freely in the wild, despite it, being said that no, they get imprinted and, it will create a problem. I would still like to give them a chance. Even if the success rate is low, still it is something where we could give a chance, because that's how wild animals should be. And Manas became very, very excellent, and it actually, sort of it was like an injection given and the health came out, is because the habitat was there, because the land was there. I mean, it is still connected to Royal Manor. So it's such a huge area that Mother Nature said, okay, give me the right conditions and I'll come back, to health. So that is the beauty of these large areas.
And I'm curious when the insurgency happened, and as you said, the rhinos were mostly poached out, or probably all of them were poached out. Were there few rhinos in the Bhutan side, or they didn't have rhinos on that side?
They could have had, because I mean, one landscape where I mean, it's anyway connected. The royal manors and manors are fairly connected, except for the rivers, the Manas and the Beki rivers, which could be a barrier. But clearly, yes, they could have gone into Bhutan. But Bhutan, the habitat it's very much Bhabar. The Tarai bit, the grassland bit in Manas is much towards the south. And then, there is a Bhabar, and then the Himalayans, the sub-Himalayans start. So even if they were there, it wasn't the best habitat for them to be there. Yeah.
Makes sense. Are there rhinos still being conservation relocation of rhinos from Kaziranga or Pavitra to Manas? Is it still going on, or I mean, it isn't?
It is in the pipeline. It's something which, there was this document called the India Rhino Vision 2020, which was there, and they had said that we'll double up the population by 2020. So there, Manas, Debru Saikwa, these are the areas which have been put through. But having said that, I think now, since Manas has around, I think 48 to 50 rhinos, so they have a stable population. They still have a stable population which will, grow on its own. And but then, yes, within Assam, if there are rhinos to be moved out, then probably Manas will be one of the the key places which could be thought of for releasing them. Yes.
I see. We've had a long conversation, so I won't take too much of your time. But finally, to finish up, how do you envision the future of wildlife in India? I think what are some of the challenges looking into the future, and what prescriptions would you offer for meeting those challenges?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one, Rasa, I think. But as I said, I'm a forever optimist, and I see a positive in the wildlife conservation scene in India. I definitely see that we have much more. Of course, the numbers tell us that there are much more wildlife. We also have much more people, much more children who are aware of wildlife, who are sort of empathy, to have the empathy towards wildlife. So that is something which is a good thing for us. If I say the major challenge, as I would say, I mean, as a forester, I think it is to do with this dilemma between, passive management and active management. So for me, that is something which I am envisioning, because, more and more as a forest department or as a forest service, we have to sort of look at conflict, human-animal conflict. We have to look at animals straying out of areas. We have to look at carnivores and how they interact with humans, and of course the infrastructure, the linear infrastructure. So these are the major challenges, and are we geared enough for that? That is something which I really don't have the straight answer as of now, but we are probably half prepared. We don't have, we usually have a sort of post-operative actions, whereas we need to be more proactive in terms of how do we, manage our wildlife. So that is there. And the prescriptions, I would say, come to the first questions that you sent about, talked about the researchers and academic institutions. I think, like in again, to give examples from some of the, better managed countries, academic institutions must work closely with parks, with protected areas. And it has to be at the policy level, something where, like, for example, Kaziranga, around it, there are 3 or 4 universities. There has to be a sort of a very dynamic feedback and, mechanisms where management is science driven, or policy driven. It is not just for the wildlife science, but also our social sciences, also for our, other sciences, that it should be a very active management and coordination, which could be a great prescription, and we could, get some great results over the period of time. How do we do that is a question, but I guess it can happen. Very recently, in the new national education policy, they made it compulsory or sort of mandatory for the college kids to do internships. So, and it is like, I think they have to do 180 hours or something, these undergrads. So this year we had 80 interns, 80 kids from the local colleges do internships with us. It wasn't, I mean, these are unpaid, and, they may have, but at least it was a great start. At least now I have 80 champions who would be more empathetic about, Kaziranga, the conservation challenges, and maybe they are available for us in the future, when we are trying to manage our wildlife outside our protected areas. So these are some of the small prescriptions that I would like to suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is, this internship thing and that new young blood is at least, even if they're not directly working, they are now exposed to the world of wildlife and conservation directly, and I've worked with the Forest Department with quite an optimistic note to perhaps finish this conversation act. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your time. It is, if I think you've taken about an hour of your time. You've been very gracious and kind with your time. Thank you so much. But there are many, many more conversations to be had. So I hope I maybe bug you again some other day with more questions.
Anytime, Raza. And you're such a delight to, always talk to, or, this thing. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Indeed an honor, and wish you a very, very happy Wildlife Week and the festival season. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm loved by it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Bye.